Hello, and welcome to the segment of Am I a Bad Mom podcast. Today, we are going to address something that is being thrown around a lot in media, I think. The topic is burnout, and what's being thrown around in media a lot lately is mom burnout, specifically, like how mothers are feeling just done these days. And so I want to do this in a couple segments. I want to talk about what is it? What is burnout? What does that actually mean? What are some things to look for to see if you're experiencing it and what to do about it if you think you are? So first of all, what is it? So the sort of definition of burnout is a complete mental, physical, and emotional. So all three: mental, thoughts, cognitions, things like that, physical, and emotional exhaustion. I often use the word overwhelm because to me, overwhelm is like when something has taken over the system and there's no room for anything else. So, some things to look for that are sort of part of the definition of this is like physically, that physical part is like fatigue. You're getting sick a lot, probably. Maybe your appetite's changed, your sleep pattern has changed. You're either not getting enough or that's all you do is sleep. From a mental and emotional perspective, like you might be a little irritable or cynical, or suddenly you have a real pessimistic view of the world. You also might have zero motivation, even for things that used to bring you some joy. You also may not be feeling joy in things that used to bring you joy. A loss of interest in things that even used to interest you. Also detached, lonely, feeling like you're not really connected. Those are all can be part of burnout. They're all sort of symptoms of it to be looking out for. They sound a lot like symptoms of depression. And so that's when people come see me, that's often what I'm trying to tease out. Is this a depression diagnosis? Are these depressive symptoms, or are these depressive symptoms that actually are a result of burnout from that complete mental, physical, and emotional exhaustion? Usually caused by more work. So if you think of like the scales of justice, like a balance beam or not a balance beam, a seesaw, and you have one side is work and one side is support. We get overwhelmed. We experience burnout when that work side hits the ground and the support side is not heavy enough to balance it out. So again, some of this is within our control and some of it isn't always within our control. The support sometimes isn't something we even can get if we ask for it. And the work is given to us, if you will, and we don't really have a choice one way or the other to get out of it. So what do you do? That doesn't really sound... well, also let me back up a little bit. So that's what happens. It's the more work than support. Very simply put, this is a very simple explanation of burnout. There are books and research papers and all sorts of other things out there on it. I'm just giving you the sort of quick and dirty version. And sometimes, though, that burnout can be caused by, not caused. There are some factors at play: work, home, the amount of chores we have in both places. But also it could come from if we are perfectionists, if we feel like we have to be in control. And that has a bad connotation. Controlling has a bad connotation, but sometimes feeling the need to be control can be I even hate myself for saying this, but a trauma response. I hate using that because it's such a social media trope, trauma response, but it can be. That need for control can be our attempt at safety. We may have learned along the way in our lives that if anybody else is in charge, we're not safe. And so we need to be in control of everything. But that can lead to, as you might imagine, overwhelm, because if we feel like we need to be in control of everything, we have a hard time letting go of anything, giving over that control to anyone else that may be actually a supportive person or somebody who can help us. If you're a perfectionist, on top of all that, imagine. So you're a perfectionist who feels the need to control everything and has more work than you have support. Those are all factors that can contribute to it, including if you just sort of generally have a pessimistic outlook. Oftentimes you get there quicker. And so burnout can cause that pessimistic outlook. It can reframe what you're doing, your own sort of outlook on life to be a more pessimistic one. But if you kind of start out that way, if you're a glass half empty kind of person, then you're going to get to the burnout phase faster. the hardest thing to do, I think, is to not ignore it. Because I think we've been programmed from early days that we're just supposed to plug on through, that strong people or tough people or, fill in the blank type of people, they manage it. They suck it up. They get over it. They move through it. And so what I see a lot of times is on top of all of that overwhelm, that physical, emotional, and mental overwhelm, there is shame as well, because we somehow talk ourselves into thinking we're weak or we're whiny or we're whatever for not being able to handle all of this stuff. There's something wrong with us that we're not able to handle all this stuff. So I was going to say here's step one, but I think step one really is not only acknowledging it, but giving yourself the grace to recognize it's not a weakness of yours that got you here. It's not some thing in you that needs to be fixed or that you did wrong in order to get yourself here. It's, a million different factors, but they are not because of your character. So that's step number one, is when you recognize the signs of burnout, also recognizing you didn't do this to yourself, or you're not experiencing this because you're not strong enough to deal with what you've been given. That's just not fair to you. And so let's start with that. But then there are some things you can do. And we're going to talk about this a little bit in another episode because I want to address it a little bit differently. So we're going to talk about this in the next episode. So hang in there with me. But there are some things you can do to address burnout to hopefully help yourself heal from it and also prevent it in the future. We're going to talk about both of those things a little bit today. And the very first one is, let's say these aren't in any order. I'm going to name them in order, but it's really what works for you, because asking for help sounds obvious. And I also recognize it's not always an option in certain ways. So then the next thing I was going to say is the reframing piece might have to happen first before you ask for help. And by reframing, I mean a couple different things. One, you're going to want to kind of evaluate your life. So very often we get to the burnout phase because, again, we're overwhelmed by the amount of things we have to do and the lack of support in doing them. And so one way to reframe is to look at all the things we have to do and ask ourselves, why? And do we have to? So reevaluating your own values and your own priorities to see, am I living my life aligned with those things? And again, this is all very privileged of a take. Some people don't, their values are feed my family. And so I'm going to do what I can do to feed my family. I get that. And I've been there, and I understand in those days, I did not have an option to reevaluate my priorities. My priorities were feed my family at all costs. And how do I do that? I work my fingers to the bone, and my husband works his fingers to the bone. Even then, though, we had some things that we could do to keep ourselves from being completely burned out. And those can come about as a result of reframing and reevaluating your priorities. So yes, my priorities were my family, but what did that need to look like? Did it need to look exactly as I thought, or could things change a little bit so that my time with them was just as valuable as the money that I made to, do the things or whatever? So reframing your values, your priorities, what's important and what needs to be done is an important part of healing from and helping to prevent future burnout. The obvious thing too, that's part of this that, I have as my number 3, but is sort of like the duh one of this list is rest. And you might be thinking, well, you just told me that I don't have enough support to do the things that I need to do. So how do I rest? And that again comes from the reframing piece. Because if you're realizing I have to place a higher value on taking care of myself, or else it doesn't matter how hard I work or what I do, I'm eventually going to burn myself out to the point of not being able to do any of it. So how can I reestablish things in my life so that I'm getting the rest? And, we talked about at the very beginning, one of the symptoms is your appetite and your sleep might change. So reprioritizing getting sleep, getting that rest somehow, some way, and rest. I use that term differently than sleep because rest might just be like a shutting off while you lay on the couch with a kid, or something that renews you. So it might be eating your lunch outside in the sunshine versus in the basement of the building or in the at your cubicle or whatever. If you can get yourself to get some fresh air, that might be a more restful lunch 20 minutes than the 20 minutes that you're also doing something at your desk or just even in a part of the building that is dark and dank and everything else. That comes from that reprioritizing of things. Because when you reprioritize and you reframe, you're able to see, well, what parts do I have some control over here? I can't quit my job and I can't give my kids back, but maybe I can change the way I spend my 20-minute break, or I can change what I do on weekends or on the evenings. Or maybe this one job, the money that I'm actually making from it doesn't actually make enough of a difference for me to lose all my sleep. Really looking at the whole picture instead of like, this is the thing I'm doing and this is how I'm going to do it. Sort of looking at how it all fits together can get you to a place where you go, okay, well, rest needs to be a priority, or at least renewing my energy needs to be a bit of a priority. So how can I make that happen? And can I ask anybody for help? I know that was number one on here. And I acknowledge like that's not always the easiest thing to do. Not only is it not easy to ask, but sometimes it's just not there. But there might be something, maybe a neighbor and you swap kids once a week so that they have yours and you have theirs and it's free and nobody, and neither of you, have any expectations on like you do what you need to do during that time. Or maybe you have a sister or a brother or somebody who can help with something at the house that you've been trying to do yourself, or help with the apartment that you've been trying to do. Or maybe you have a partner whose hours are different than yours and they can spend time on the phone trying to get something resolved instead of you having to take time out of your day to do that and then pushing work farther into the evening. Again, it all comes with that reframe and that reprioritize of how do I get these things done and what is most important to me to get done. The other things are kind of this like not esoteric, but like a little bit more, a little concrete, but also a little bit more. Here's some nice things to be able to do that really do help heal and prevent burnout. And one is just movement. Again, I talked about going outside to eat your lunch rather than eating it in a dark, dank basement. Like there's little things in life like that we may not even realize we're kind of doing to ourselves. I worked for a long time in a courthouse basement. My office was in the basement. And when I was in court, with the judges and the people, I was sitting oftentimes in a courthouse with no windows or I was with a different judge and I was in a courthouse with big, huge, almost like 10-foot windows where sun would just pour in. And then there were other days where I spent a good deal of time in my office, which was literally the basement of this, municipal building. So windowless, airless, gray walls, cinder block, like not great. And a couple things happened through that year. One, I realized on the days that I got to be in court, even when it was raining, on the days that I got to be in the courtroom with the windows, I liked, quote unquote, liked my job better. I laughed because I generalized it that way. Like, oh, today I had a really good day at work. And nothing had been different except the location of where I was. So it wasn't the job. I was putting it on the job, but really what it was, did I get to see the sun? Did I know there was outside time? Oftentimes we'd eat our lunch at those desks in that basement and it would just be awful. Like it was awful. But then other times it was nice enough. I'd get out of the building for a few minutes and like just breathe some fresh air. And that was just enough. Like those few minutes of fresh air every day was just enough to sort of keep the job from feeling completely overwhelming and sad. And so when I say your mood and your energy, like check your mood and your energy. So when I say movement or when I say environment or when I say those things, really what I'm talking about is where are you feeling okay? Or where do you remember you used to feel okay? Or when do you remember you used to feel better than other days? Again, if you have a cubicle job in a place with no windows, can you, go outside and walk around the building 3 times at lunch and just give yourself some fresh air and some movement of your body? We all, I think, anybody who has any kind of desk job learned over the lockdown during pandemic, like how much sitting really wreaked havoc with our bodies because we weren't in an office. So we weren't even getting up to like talk to the person in the cubicle next to us or walking to the cafeteria for lunch. We went from like a little bit of movement in most cases to like just plop down in a chair in front of a computer for 8 hours a day. And we all, our backs and our hips and everything else started to tell the tale of that. So are you getting enough renewing movement? Again, I recognize some of you have really physical jobs. And so you're like, don't tell me to move my body. I move it all day long. Okay, great. So then what you might need is, how can I get 5 minutes where I'm sitting and doing nothing, or where I'm sitting in a cross-legged stretch, or where I get to sit up straight. If you're at a thing where you're hunched over or bent over, can I take 5 minutes to put my legs up a wall or stand straight, or, put myself in mountain pose and keep everything sort of aligned for a few minutes a day. Whatever works to counteract the stuff you're doing during the day that overwhelms you, how can you fit that in? Whether it's movement, or being outside versus inside, or being inside where it's warm instead of outside in the freezing cold where you are all day, or can you bring hot tea or coffee with you to in a thermos to work? Whatever you can do to protect your energy, which will then ultimately protect your mood. How can you fit that in? And then the other one is, how do you get to be you? In all the research I was doing for this episode, one of the things that kept coming up was like, how do you nourish your creative side? And I know for some people that's like, what are you saying? I'm not creative. I used to think that about myself. I used to think like, I'm not creative. I don't draw or paint or sew or any of that stuff. Like that was in my brain, that you were creative, quote unquote, if you were an artist. It never occurred to me that like I write to live, and that takes creativity. Or even like creating a spreadsheet is creative for some people, or rearranging furniture in the living room is creative for some people. Like nourishing your creativity doesn't have to mean like painting a mural. It means, how do you nourish that part of you that is sort of free to do what makes it happy? For some of you, that might be like an accounting or a budget spreadsheet, or, for some it's, taking pictures outside. For some, it's going for a run. For some, it's whatever. It's, how do you nourish your inner kid, your inner play, your inner self that feels most like themselves when they're doing this thing? It could just be listening to music. It could be playing music. Whatever it is, how do you do that? How do you nourish that part of you? And that, again, might also sound like, I have no idea. If you're in the middle of a season where you're feeling the burnout, these steps might feel like more than you can handle. And in that case, I would say the very first thing you do is ask for help. Who in your life can give you 5 minutes? And if it's not a person you can ask, where can you go to find support? Can you go to the library in your town and just sit and read, or ask someone to help you find a book? Because that might feel supportive, to just have someone else help you with something. Can you listen to a podcast that makes you feel good? Can you laugh? Like, can you have some support around you that does one of those other things, that helps you with rest, that helps you with renewal, that helps you reframe, or that helps you move your body, or find an energy source that feeds you? If there aren't people, if you really don't think there are people in your life that can help and support you, then what can you find in your life that helps and supports you heal and rest and renew? Short term, those are short term. Long term, then, how do you look at your current situation to reframe it and to build it back in such a way that those scales don't never tip quite this much anymore? And I'm not going to say never, because look, it's life. And sometimes we find ourselves in these cycles of, oh no, here we go again. I feel like I'm completely overwhelmed. And in those cases, then you go, wait, okay, let me step back. Let me remember what worked last time. Let me either replicate those same things, or find ways to replicate the results in a different way that my life works now. For instance, I moved away when my children were young from support. My family, and actually at that time, my husband's family, like there were no grandparents around when I moved. There were no aunts, there were no uncles, there were no siblings in the immediate area. And I found myself home alone with these 3 little kids, and a husband that was commuting to work an hour and 20 minutes one way, and at work way more hours. We could do a whole episode on his burnout at that time, but let's stick to this. We'll stick to what I know right now. But whatever, I was alone. I no longer had the support that I used to have. And so I at first didn't think I could reach out. I was like, I don't know anybody and I don't want to ask, I don't want to ask of anybody else what I used to ask of my family because that didn't seem fair. But what I found over time was if I got out with the kids, if I, walked to school to pick up the oldest with the younger two, well, then sort of inevitably people kind of flock to similar people. And so I met some moms that had kids the same age, or my little ones, when I was waiting for the big one, would play with other little ones in front of the school. And then I would start talking to those moms. And while I didn't regain the sort of, babysitting help and support in my home that my family provided me when I lived closer, what I did get was a support system of other parents that I could go over after school and not be alone with my kids. Like also my kids got some playmates. And so I built a different kind of support system. And even though it didn't replace what I lost, it provided enough that I didn't feel as overwhelmed or as lonely and disconnected as I did when I first moved here and felt like I had no one or nothing in place to help me. It wasn't immediate, and it didn't come from places that I thought it might. And it did require from me some reevaluating of what's important to me. How am I going to immediately go back to a job, like a full-time job, or am I going to figure out how to reprioritize so that we can live off this 1.5? I was doing some freelance stuff at the time, but like this limited salary, is that ultimately better than me going back to work and without the support of what I had before? Everybody's different and every situation's different. And we had just enough to, if you've listened to any of these other podcasts or you've known any of my blogs, it's not like my husband's job was super lucrative and we were, living the high life. We were barely scraping by, but rather than try to solve that one problem only by going to a job that probably would have been actually worse than what we chose, we tried to figure out a way to reprioritize, find a different support system, ask for help where I could, or create opportunities where I had the help, baked in because we were part of a group or part of a club or part of something, make the connections. My personality is such that it would have been much easier for me to just stay home with my kids, meaning like never put myself out there, never talk to people, never ask for help, never try to make friends with anybody. It would have been much simpler and much easier. It is not easy for me to put myself out in the world and say, I'm vulnerable and I need help. It's not easy for any of us to do that. Let's be clear. But in those days, it was really embarrassing almost for me to admit, like, I don't know anybody. I don't know what I'm doing. My husband's never around. I have no idea like how to get to the grocery store. Like I was a brand new person in a brand new town and I had to just share that. And then I also had to share the fact that like, look, I used to work and now I don't work. And so I can't take the kids to this place with you because I don't have the money for that. And these were new friends. And I had to admit to them, like, look, this is who I am. And this is how things are for me. And I'd love to hang out, but I can only do it if it's in the backyard or at the park down the street because that's free. And sure enough, over time, I found the people that resonated with and then felt supported and connected. I won't say I didn't burn out in the process. Like I was pretty close. And like I said, my husband 100% did because he didn't have the same support and he had way more work than support. But we found our way out of it by doing those things, by asking for help or finding opportunities where we could ask for help because it didn't look the way it used to. And also doing a lot of reevaluating our own values and priorities and getting some kind of renewing rest. Even if that rest wasn't sleep, it was, laying on the couch in the evening watching movies with the kids. Something where like our brains were shut off and we didn't have to do much other than sort of be present. That was renewing and restful for us. So those steps all kept it from coming back. We both were overwhelmed. We both were burnt out. The move nearly broke us both. The new job nearly broke him. And we found our way out of that, not so eloquently, not so elegantly. It was a bit of a, back and forth mess of trial and error. But we set ourselves up so that it would not happen again because we kept our sort of fingers in these things. We kept reevaluating our priorities and our values. When we started to feel that overwhelm again, we went back to the stuff we knew worked before to try to keep ourselves from getting sort of falling to the bottom of the pit again. So even if you're already there, even if you are at the level of complete mental, physical, and emotional exhaustion, it is not the end. You can come back from that. And then in the future, when you sense it coming down the pike again, because I wish I could tell you get rid of it forever, but I don't know that it ever is fully, at least in this modern age of parenthood, I'm not sure it's ever not a risk. But when you feel yourself sort of heading down that direction again, you know what worked before, and you know how to keep yourself from going all the way there, from having those scales tip so entirely that your support is gone for the amount of work that you have. It might not be even, but you can get them closer together if you employ some of these things, if you keep support around, if you reframe your values and priorities, if you are looking for ways to move and to be in an environment that is good for your mood and your energy levels, if you're nourishing yourself in some way, even if it's small, and even if it's once a week, and if you're resting in a way that is renewing, that gives you back the energy at the end of the day, so you're not just burning an already burnt wick. You get to start fresh every day, or fresher. Let me be realistic. Okay, so that's burnout in a very, 25-minute explanation of how you can spot it and what you can do to kind of keep yourself away from it as much as possible, or heal from it as much as possible. And we'll talk a little bit more next time about how you do that reprioritizing and reframing of your values and priorities, starting with asking yourself, what if you just didn't do some of these things? So stay tuned for that next time. And in the meantime, if you're feeling any of this stuff, I'll put my website and contact information in the show notes. And then even if you're not in the geographic area for my services, we can schedule a 15-minute good fit call, and I'll try to help you find somebody closer to you, because everybody deserves to have that help. All right. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned for the Me Time segment. Hi, welcome back to the Me Time segment of Am I a Bad Mom podcast. So I just have one thing today because I've been watching it a lot. So one of the ways, which if you've ever been on this podcast before, you know this about me, one of the ways that I get some rest and renewal is watching TV. And I know that sounds counterintuitive because oftentimes TV is like a mindless thing that you do, but it is not for me. I find it to be really renewing because I love like story television. And so one of the things I've been watching recently, again, my husband's, he's not been home a lot. He's been traveling a lot. So I've been able to watch whatever I want, which is lovely. We have this unwritten thing. I don't even know if either one of us sort of acknowledged it, but sit together in the evenings. We sit together and we watch TV. We pick something that we both like, which often means we don't watch something that we want. 99% of the time he's falling asleep on the couch, but still it's sort of this unwritten thing that like, we're not going to like go to different rooms and watch shows. We're going to try to stay together for that because we already spend so much time apart anyway. This just feels like a way for us to come back together at the end of the day. Anyway, that was way too much information about this, but it is to show you like he's not big into British television. I am. I love British crime dramas. It started a million years ago with the show Broadchurch. It sucked me in, and I have been a sucker ever since for any kind of British crime drama. So I, a while ago, subscribed to BritBox, telling tales on myself. Yes, I 100% pay for the British television streaming service, but I'm pretty sure that you can find this show even just on regular Amazon. I might be wrong. I hope I'm not wrong because you really need to go watch it. But it's called The Bay. There's a bunch of seasons. And actually, I've only finished 2 seasons. The 3rd season, I believe, has a completely different cast from what it looks like. But there's not much to explain. It's a missing persons crime, detective. Although they're not detectives, they're family liaisons. So they work with I don't know if this is true at all. I'm going to need some of my UK listeners to correct me on this, but the way that it seems in this show is that in the police department, or what we in America would call the police department, there's detectives, and then there's like teams of people that work on these murder/missing person cases, including these family liaisons that go into the home of the victim and liaise between the police and the family. But because it's TV, they have a much more active role in the investigation than maybe they're even supposed to on in the fictitious world. But they do. They sort of like, they get to know the family. They ask certain questions. They report back. They do some investigating. They do some digging. The cool thing about this show, first of all, it opens with a really unbelievable twist. Like minute 1 to minute 10 of the very first episode, you're like, oh, okay, we're doing this. So that's great. But also what's cool about it is that the sort of lead person, she is a family liaison officer. And while the storyline of the family is going on, meaning the family of the murdered person, she has some drama going on with her own family. And so it's cool the way that sort of intertwines and maybe has something to do with each other, but you're not really sure. It's if you've ever seen Broadchurch, there's a little reminiscent Broadchurchiness to it because of that. So that's probably why I sort of dug it from the beginning. But I also really like the actors in it. They're good. They're always good, but they stuck out to me as really excellent actors. So yeah, it's called The Bay. I watched it through BritBox, but I'm pretty sure you can find it on Amazon. And it's BAY, not like Beyonce Bay. It's like The Bay, like they live on the bay. Anyway, that's all I got this week. Just, to avoid some burnout by watching a little good British crime drama television. Let's try it. It's worked for me so far, so I hope it works for you. All right, thank you for listening. Until next time, I'll see you back here.